Let's flash back to 2012. Marvel had just announced their Phase 2 slate, and they had a Thor sequel releasing at the end of 2013. Game of Thrones was huge at the time, so after Patty Jenkins left the project, they figured they would bring in a director from Game of Thrones to direct the second Thor film. It's a movie about gods, dark elves, fantastical kingdoms and creatures, infinity stones, and a lot of Loki thrown in there. After all, Loki is a very popular character. And the movie would center around the two brothers of Odin going on a little road trip to go save the Nine Realms. What could go wrong? Well, it could end up a lot like Thor The Dark World. Thor The Dark World is the second film in Phase 2 of the MCU, the 8th film overall, and it was directed by Alan Taylor, who had directed a handful of Game of Thrones episodes by the time this movie came out. Fun fact, Patty Jenkins was originally signed on to direct this movie, then made the smarter choice of saving her career, at which point she proceeded to make a couple Wonder Woman movies, the first of which is pretty well liked by everyone. The second one, on the other hand, please go away. I can only afford to talk about one bad movie today. So prepare for not much praise, because we have reached what was for a long time my least favorite MCU film. It's not anymore, but it was for a while. So let's start at the beginning of this movie, because it actually starts out pretty strong. We get Odin narration just like the start of the first Thor, and it is over a battle between Asgard and the Dark Elves 5,000 years before. The story of this movie takes place because 5,000 years ago would have been the last time the convergence happened, which is when all of the Nine Realms overlap. And this scene is gorgeous. It then cuts to 2013, where Thor, Sif, the Warriors 3, and all the Asgardian soldiers are just kicking all kinds of ass. Collectively, this all may be the biggest middle finger to fans, because the movie starts at a really high point and then proceeds to take a nosedive into one of the circles of hell, because we then get forced down to London to watch Jane Foster on a date more cringy than the time Anakin Skywalker complained about sand. Both of which involve Natalie Portman, by the way. Let's talk about Jane real quick, because Jane was a positive element of the first Thor movie. She was really smart, she had a lot of personality, she contributed to the story, she helped with Thor's character, and at the end you felt bad when the two of them were forced to split up. What this movie does is it takes all of that and pulls it out of Jane's character. In Dark World, Jane Foster is just a horny love interest whose sole purpose is to house the Reality Stone, which is liquid form for some damn reason, so Thor and Loki can set a trap that they should have known would never work. So let's go over the plot of this movie. So Malekith, who's evil, wants the ether so he can bring darkness to all nine realms during the convergence by kind of just shooting it through all the world portals and making all the worlds go dark. Now the convergence is something that should have been a lot cooler than it was, because it really wasn't that exciting. And as Thor said in Endgame, Jane stuck her hand in a stone, then the ether stuck itself in her. So what Thor needs to do is protect Jane and stop Malekith from getting the ether and doing his evil things. Now Malekith is maybe the worst villain in a comic book movie, with the possible exception of Justice League Steppenwolf. He has no personality, he has no motive, he has no reason to be doing what he's doing. Malekith and his Dark Elves are just evil for the sake of being evil, which is really sad. Because these dudes look awesome. I love the look and the fear factor of the Dark Elves, but they aren't established in a way that makes them frightening, even though the movie seems to think they are. Thor never even fights them, they never pose a threat to anyone, they never even get in Thor's way from fighting Malekith. The four unarmed scientists deal with the Dark Elves, so they never really pose any threat, and it's a total waste of characters. They're set up to be awesome and look so ridiculously badass. And their leader's Malekith, who's even less cool in his army. He wants to get the ether so he can return the Nine Realms to total darkness. Why? We don't know. The movie doesn't give a shit, so neither should we. Malekith spends the entire movie just giving orders in gibberish, power walking to look frightening while not actually being frightening, and that only ends up being a challenge to Thor because he has the ether. But the movie expects us to believe that this expert military general who can destroy Asgard's national security in seconds somehow poses any threat to Thor when he can't even win a one-on-one fight with Rene Russo wielding a butter knife. Speaking of Rene Russo, I actually do think that Frigga's death is a positive for this movie, and it was a good call. She was a character that the audience liked but didn't feel a super strong attachment to, but her death pushed the stories of both Sons of Odin forward in a big way, not a small one-movie kind of way. Her death is something that contributes to both Thor's and Loki's arcs for the rest of the MCU, which is, it's cool that they pulled that off considering how little screen time she has. And if they wanted to kill a side character to show that there are stakes, they picked the right one to go with. Damn, her funeral was great though. That scene and that music is incredible. Speaking of death, the movie was actually going to permanently kill off Loki, but they made a rewrite because the fan response to him was so positive that they knew they couldn't get rid of this character. And thank God they did do that rewrite, because Loki is the one redeeming aspect of this movie. It should have been called Loki The Dark World. He has the coolest character, the most personality, and the best scenes, while the title character of the movie spends the entire time attempting to recreate the personality of one of the background fish in a shot of Finding Nemo. Yeah, that's an exaggeration, but seriously, Thor is nothing in this movie. He's strong, and he's hot. That's pretty much his character. He does have one really good line at the end, though.
The brutality, the sacrifice, it changes you. I'd rather be a good man than a great king.
I love that line, but it's a crime that the least interesting character in a Thor movie is Thor. I was ready to go into things I liked, but we haven't touched on the human characters yet, and I want to talk about them because, oh boy, they certainly do not help to improve this movie. Already mentioned, Jane got screwed over in this movie. It's a well-known fact that Natalie Portman wasn't too happy with how things ended up going, and she was written out of the franchise in a direct contradiction to the ending of this movie. Fun fact, there's an alternate ending that actually has her and Thor breaking up because they realize they really just can't be together. I think that would have been a better ending. But what happened to Jane in this movie, it's not primarily the fault of Natalie Portman. Natalie Portman's chemistry with Chris Hemsworth is not as strong in this movie as it was in the first Thor movie, but also her character was just written so terribly. In the first one, she was a strong character, as I mentioned. In this one, she's an uninteresting plot device that does nothing of significance in the entire movie, because the problem that she should have found a way to resolve, the naked man running through Stonehenge solved in between movies. I mean, no wonder Natalie Portman didn't want to return. They took everything good about Jane and got rid of it. Taika's given her something to do, though. I'm really interested to see how that plays out. Yet, Jane is not even remotely the worst human character in this movie. They ruined Eric Selvig by making him a psychotic drunk who runs naked through landmarks. And Darcy's still the fun-loving sidekick who seems dumb but really isn't, so I can't say they screwed her up. But they put another character in this movie. And he, ladies and gentlemen, is the worst character in Thor The Dark World. Ian, Darcy's intern, who is equal parts dumb and annoying and makes me want to bleach my eyes every time he's on screen. And that's all I'm going to say about it. How was this movie written by the people who wrote the Captain America trilogy, Infinity War, Endgame, and the writer of Thor Ragnarok? All 6 of those movies are great. I think I've gotten the worst aspects of this movie out of the way, so I do want to touch on some positives, because this isn't the worst thing to grace the screen. It isn't even the worst MCU movie. Brian Tyler's score is fantastic. There's a lot of solid tracks, my personal favorite being Into Eternity, which is the one that plays during Frigga's funeral. His music sometimes even puts a lot more emotion into several parts of the film, and I think it actually helps carry the film. It's one of the most redeeming aspects of the movie. Anything involving Svartalfheim intrigues me. A big sequence of the movie takes place there, and as mentioned, the aesthetic of that world is absolutely stunning, and the movie is way too beautiful while they're on that planet. All of the action, besides the final battle, is fine. They're not the most exciting things, but I'm not going to say they're bad. The action's shot well, you can see what's happening, but there's nothing intense or edge of your seat about it. And I did say everything except the final battle because I think they really screwed up on the final battle. Going between 9 different realms while fighting is something so cool, but the final battle came off as really boring to me. I don't think that was executed well. We get some Asgard world building. Instead of just seeing golden halls, we get to take a glimpse at the lives of the non-royal Asgardians, which is always good because expanding the worlds of these characters will never be a negative for me. So even if Asgard just looks less incredible and exciting than it did in the first Thor, it is more than just a palace and a rainbow bridge in this movie. So good on you, movie. There are 3 scenes in this movie that I think are so incredible they deserve a better movie. Those are the opening battle, as mentioned, Frigga's funeral, and the conversation that Loki and Thor have when they arrive on Svartalfheim. That scene's just... that's the best scene of the movie. Nothing in this movie even comes close to those 3 scenes. Now, don't get me wrong, there's still some good scenes, but nothing like those. One of the times I watched this movie, I watched it with friends, and when Thor, Loki, and Jane got to Svartalfheim, one of the people I was watching it with said that the movie is boring. An easy sign that a comic book movie failed its most important task is when someone can say it's boring. And that is an opinion I share. I like parts of Dark World, enough parts that I'm entertained when I watch it, but nothing excites me about it. It's just there. It falls flat. Thank God Taika came along and turned the franchise around, because somehow the God of Thunder became the character that no one cared about. So I am going to give Thor The Dark World a C-. It has enough positive elements that it's not awful, it just isn't particularly good. I think I like this movie less than most people, and I'll proudly accept that. But believe it or not, after all I've said, there's still an MCU film that I consider to be worse than this one. But we'll get to that one when it's time. So guys, there's my review of Thor The Dark World. What did you think of the movie? What did you think of my review? Let me know all that down in the comments below. Also, leave a like on this video, subscribe, click on the bell icon to receive all notifications from the MCU HQ. That's going to be it. Have a great day, guys.